So let's take a look at Illinois, see if we can find a state representative race here that's interesting enough to run in. I like to start with the evens just because they're close. And let's see, 68, first one on the list, looks pretty good. Let's take a look at what that looks like in Ballotpedia. All right, Dave's been in since 21. That's sufficiently long to be tied to the district. We do have a Republican here, so that's good for us. So registered voters, a little less than 70K. Estimated turnout about 45, 46%. That seems to be run-of-the-mill for Illinois. It's a little low, a little lower than what you'd expect out of, I don't know, a district, what I'd hope for out of a district. But actually, if we're going to be doing some GOTV here, that gives us a little bit extra opportunity. The district is D+1. It is super even. And if we look down here at the active voter universe breakdown, it looks like hard Republicans outnumber hard Democrats. Soft Republicans are outnumbered by soft Democrats slightly. And then there is just a huge base of unidentified or persuadable folks. 15K, it's not massive in its own right, but for a district like this, it is. I would start out by, we're moving into June right now, and so assuming that Kathy, that this candidate who's in here now, has done some volunteer recruitment, if she's got the organization she needs, then obviously we can move on to phase 2. But if she's a little behind, I think I'd be looking to send a few texts out. It's cheap, efficient. If you can have conversations with these hard and soft Republicans, people who vote in primaries and who were regular voters in gubernatorial years, for a relatively cost-efficient price here, I'd send a few texts and see if I could build out my organization a little bit more. Because again, nothing is a substitute for face-to-face contact, and that is a lot of hours, right? You've got June, July, August, September, 4 months, which is 100 hours a month, 25 hours a week, which means, let's see, we got a volunteer recruitment down here. Ooh, something like 28 volunteer shifts a week means you need about 56 active volunteers. That's a lot. Obviously, mail is the same list here. And so that would cost you 15 to 30K if you wanted to send 2 to 4 mail pieces. I'd also be looking to hire a volunteer recruiter and volunteer organizer to help with voter outreach during this time. It's basically just going to be a lot of work. But again, the GOTV lists here are quite large, right? If you're just looking at supporters, you're looking at 1,000 folks. And again, the difference here, 5, 11 and a half, 5, 12-ish, you're down about 500 base, assuming that unidentifieds break 50-50. But again, if you work and can break that a little your direction, if you can spend some effort and some time and money on turning out these 1,000 voters in your hard supporter GOTV universe, I think this district is winnable.
Okay, so if you were to design your ideal candidate in the lab, what are they doing in order to win this race? And something that I think is really interesting for first-time candidates is, what do they need to get started?
So in terms of what kind of candidate I'd like to see here, ideally, it's always ideal if the candidate is somebody who's run before or who is involved in, municipal government or is involved in one of the large voter organizations in the district. If she has some sort of ties to the district, if that's not the case, then I want someone who can work, right? Like I said, this is going to be lots of hours of door knocking and lots of making those connections that you don't have. The reason I want somebody who's connected is because then you already know voters. and you cut that list down. But if you don't, you're going to be spending your entire summer and a little bit of the fall knocking on doors, and that turns off a lot of candidates. So someone who's willing to work. When it comes to the resources to get started here, I think a medium-sized volunteer base, even just 5 to 10 people to help you make these calls to other volunteers to recruit a larger organization. And then, 5 to 10K of your own money put into the bank account really helps donors take you seriously. With 20,000 voters, with 15,000 doors, it's going to be a lot of donors. There's just no substitute for a face-to-face conversation. So to sum it up, right, I think it's a winnable district. It's fairly traditional as far as campaigns go. Right, this is about what you'd expect to see. There's a slightly smaller than average turnout and a slightly larger than I'd expect to see middle, but not hugely so. Actually, I think that our example campaign calendar here is really well adapted to a race like this, right? Where in the early stages you're building that organization because you're going to need it to do the ID and persuasion. And then ID and persuasion is going to take the whole summer, right when voters are starting to get engaged about now, until October when early voting starts, and you just push out every ID'd supporter, every low propensity voter who you think is going to support you. And then you pray. And if you want to see one of these for your district, head on over to Bootstrap Office, scroll down and fill this out. Ryan and I will get an email and we'll contact you super shortly.
Super shortly. Yeah. Oh, check it out.